warm welcome to all of you to yet another edition of What Works, What Doesn't and Why, Insights from Evaluation. And as I've said previously, What Works is actually that event by IED which flags off the dissemination activities of our evaluations. And the objective is that we want to share our evaluations with ADB staff before we take it out for external stakeholders. Today, we will be speaking about IED's evaluation of the One ADB approach. So what is One ADB approach? ADB defines this approach as bringing together expertise and knowledge in a range of areas across ADB. As you know, there are already many initiatives under the One ADB umbrella to help ensure that ADB is delivering integrated solutions to its developing member countries, regardless of sector, thematic, or regional silos. IED's report suggests ways to enhance their effectiveness through complementary measures and greater coordination. And at this point, I'd like to invite the lead author of this evaluation, Linda Adams, to make a short presentation so that we could set up the context for the discussion that is to follow. Linda, it's over to you.
Findings and recommendations of IED's corporate evaluation on One ADB, an evaluation of ADB's approach to delivering Strategy 2030. I'll start with a background to the evaluation. I'll then move on to the main findings as it relates to the three operational areas of Strategy 2030's One ADB approach. That is integrated solutions, the integration of knowledge and operations, and sovereign and non-sovereign cooperation. And I'll end the presentation with the 5 recommendations based on the evaluation. So this slide, I'm going to present the context of this evaluation, the One ADB concept, and IED's framework for analysis. We chose a formative evaluation. We're not here to assess whether One ADB approach works or not. It's an ongoing approach that commenced with Strategy 2030 in 2018. Rather, we're going to focus on lesson learning. So what does One ADB mean? It refers to collaborative behavior. As such, there's no designated portfolio that we can call One ADB. So we will be looking, the framework that we chose is an organizational development lens. And this lens comprises organizational structure, institutional culture, systems, and business processes in which ADB staff operate. And then we overlaid this lens on the 3 One ADB operational areas I just mentioned. So now I'm going to move on to the main findings with respect to the 3 operational areas. The first is integrated solutions. Not all development problems require integrated solutions. And in fact, we found in the evaluation that the integrated solutions are growing, but it varies. And it's often linked to DMC interest in tackling cross-cutting problems. We noted that ADB's delivery of such solutions is variable. We saw an increase in multi-sector operations in the pipelines of the 6 countries that we examined in the evaluation. However, these are modest if we compare it with the CPS strategic priorities and the indicative country pipeline. This is due partially to the fact that the delivery of integrated solutions within ADB is organized along sector lines. So typically the pipeline is driven by a single sector division. And similarly, the DMCs are organized by sectors. The culture and behavioral incentives in ADB remain primarily driven by lending culture and targets. And this can contribute to competition between departments. Looking quickly at figure 3 to the left, this was an ADB-wide staff survey, and you'll note that 2/3 of the regional departments and half of PSOD staff strongly agreed that there's competition between departments. So you can imagine this would be an issue when you're trying to operationalize collaborative behavior across departments. Along with culture and behavioral incentives, we have to look at human resource and budget management systems. And these do not provide the incentives to foster integrated solutions. So if we look at all of these factors put together, staff face a number of challenges. So looking at our findings on the integration of knowledge and operations, we found that ADB's strategic approach does encourage collaboration to create knowledge solutions, and it has been increasing focus on knowledge solutions in the DMCs. If we look at figure 9 to the right of the screen, nearly 70% of operations department staff were generally satisfied with collaboration with the knowledge departments. However, we can see some important examples. PARD and CERD have the most favorable view compared to other operational departments. PSOD has the lowest view, ease of collaboration, followed by SARD. ADB's culture does not actively promote knowledge sharing or joint work across operations and knowledge units. And this is due to staff incentives and the transaction culture in which the creation of knowledge is often reduced to a single-use product. Another challenge, a wider challenge in general, not just with knowledge and operations, is the consensus-based and risk-averse culture within ADB, which doesn't necessarily promote innovative knowledge solutions. And this was highlighted in IED's Knowledge for Solutions development evaluation. And finally, IT tools and business processes limit the free flow of access to knowledge. And this results in an underutilization of the TA knowledge outputs from such projects. The last area we looked at is non-sovereign and sovereign collaboration. And the main findings here were the existing metrics and targets for sovereign and non-sovereign collaboration focus on joint transactions. And this limits in the recognition of the important upstream work that needs to happen and a potential for broader private market development opportunities. We also noticed that the integration of PSOD and RD's objectives in the CPSs were variable. And this was linked both to CD efforts and also to differentiated DMC opportunities. If we want to see enhancement, or there is need for enhancement between sovereign and non-sovereign collaboration to meet the targets that we've set for private sector operations growth, this will require joint diagnostic work, strategic management of existing staff resources, and targeted training. Lastly, I'd like to present the 5 recommendations that arose from the evaluation. These were roughly pertain to strategic, operational, and institutional issues. On strategic recommendations, we had 2. We suggest to strengthen the corporate coherence of the One ADB approach by developing an explicit plan of selective, purposely sequenced, and achievable institutional reforms over the medium term. Secondly, establish a dedicated change management team, and they would have responsibility for coordinating and monitoring the rollout of reforms in management systems and processes, staff training, and monitoring. Concerning operational recommendations, we also had 2. Strengthen the One ADB approach by submitting knowledge outputs of TA projects to a formal quality review and making them more accessible. So this would address the current underutilization of TA knowledge outputs. Also, accelerate the integration of PSOD into the country level matrix as an equal partner and as a core member of the country management team. And lastly, our institutional recommendation is to strengthen the country-focused model through a matrix approach so that there would be better collaboration at the country level. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, but don't go anywhere because we encourage our audiences to ask questions in the designated question and answer session. And we are also joined by the co-team leader of this evaluation, Alexander Wellsteed. Both of them are going to be here to answer any questions that you might have. And I'd like to remind you that you may put your questions in the question and answer box that you see down there. And I think the panelists and the team leaders will be very happy to answer those questions. And again, responding to your feedback, and you must respond to the feedback at the end of the event. There was a demand that there were not enough voices from the field, from the resident missions at the What Works event. So responding to that, we have this section called From the Frontlines, and let's go and see what people at the resident missions have to say about this particular IED evaluation.
I support the recommendation that ADB's resident missions should play a leading role in the programming of knowledge work. By leading knowledge efforts from the field, we can ensure that we are addressing the most pressing knowledge needs and not duplicating the efforts of other development partners. Also, field-driven knowledge work can also ensure that we're targeting our limited resources most effectively, including by linkages to future operations. I also strongly agree with IED's observation that resident missions have a really strong role to play in facilitating cross-sector and sovereign, non-sovereign operations. For example, here in the Mongolia resident mission, we've built linkages across divisions, including on how the updated energy policy impacts our rural and urban development projects and alternative solutions to meeting their energy needs.
As a field office, on-site collaboration started earlier than One ADB became official target. It was a journey of discovery. I personally went through 4 stages: forming, storming, norming, and performing through as we work together. We move through each stage as we overcome challenges, learn to work together, and eventually focus on accomplishing shared goals. Shared goals are really key. One ADB country partnership strategy was a true game changer. Last year, I was fortunate to contribute the whole strategy formulation process in the PRC and Mongolia, from evaluation of previous CPS, analytical works, consultation, and formulation for new strategy. This helped us to find truly shared goals.
The report highlights the need to strengthen sovereign-non-sovereign collaboration to support Strategy 2030 delivery, particularly in frontier markets. The review of ADB's resident mission operations and the RM Review Action Plan highlight this too, and note the important role that resident mission staff can play in non-sovereign business development and transaction processing. We've had good experience with this in Fiji, particularly when PSOD staff could not travel to Fiji due to COVID-19. Our staff work closely with PSOD on several now approved transactions and on TA to develop new business opportunities. But more needs to be done around the bank to break the organizational silos that sadly still exist, including training and stronger staff incentives.
I agree with the report that One ADB is not an end to itself, but rather an approach to deliver Strategy 2030. For this, I fully support the recommendation to strengthen the country-focused model. We have been doing so in the PRC, not only by mainstreaming private sector operation and knowledge solution in the CPS strategic pillars, but also by identifying key development challenges for our clients and work as One ADB to provide the best integrated solution of sovereign, non-sovereign, and knowledge. We have been doing so in the PRC through some flagship programs, such as the air pollution reduction in Beijing, Hebei, Tianjin, and the Yangtze River Economic Belt.
Well, now that the scene is set, let's get straight into the panel discussion. And we have a very esteemed set of panelists today. And I'd like to request all of you to please turn on your videos once I announce your names. We have with us today AED Karen Murray, Winnie Wicklein, DDG Southeast Asia Department, and Craig Roberts, Senior Advisor, Private Sector Operations. A very warm welcome to all of you. And today's session will be moderated by DG IED Emmanuel Jimenez. Manny, it's over to you now.
Saleha, and thanks, Linda, for a very clear presentation. Very pleased to have the opportunity to discuss the implications of the report of taking the One ADB approach to the next step operationally. We have a terrific panel representing 3 very different perspectives with the same objective, and that's how to make ADB more effective from an operations and regional department, the private sector, and the board. I'll start with a set of questions, which I hope will start more of a conversation among our panelists, who are going to keep their responses, I promise to anyway, short and to the point, because that way we'll have a couple of rounds of conversation that will make it interesting for all of you. Let me start with you, Vinny. The frontline videos that you saw and the report itself identifies the resident mission as the sharp point of ADB's delivery of integrated solutions. The report suggests that country directors are at the forefront in addressing this challenge. As a former country director, what do you think? Does this resonate with you? And what management tools do you, as a country director, might need to make sure that that is achieved? Vinny?
Thanks, Manny. And yes, it does resonate to me, actually. The integrated solutions have always been both the solution, but also the challenge for us on the ground, and I suppose for other partners as well. But fact is, in our countries, the clients, our DMCs, they only see ADB. They don't see the regional department, Southeast Asia department. In my case, they don't see PSOD, and that has always been the case. What is new, I suppose, over the last few years, starting with increasing decentralization and the strengthening of the resident missions, outposting of sector people, private sector investment experts and procurement people, etc., that ADB has had many more ears and eyes on the ground, and this kind of momentum, the one which is encapsulated after all in the One ADB expression, has worked quite well actually to enable the resident missions to coordinate and offer to the client the best that ADB has to offer, really. So some examples from the ground, Exhibit A in Indonesia, my last resident mission, for example, we've really put a premium on joint sovereign and non-sovereign approaches, starting from the CPS formulation to business development through country programming, and now also pursuing joint initiatives, for example, energy transition mechanism and others. Exhibit 2 on the coordination of knowledge. We have established in Indonesia and how we brought in Indonesia a joint public-private approach to play, and also how we coordinated knowledge work. Just very briefly, before I have problems again with the IT, what are some of the tools? I think mindset-wise, we are, which is the most important bit, we have progressed quite a bit. Culturally, particularly maybe in public and private, we need to do some more training to become all a little bit more bi-cultural, as it were. And then the matrix, the strengthening of the dotted lines that strengthen the CD's roles as the coordinator of the country operations. I'm pleased that this is ongoing as part of the resident mission reviews. I stop here, Manny, before IT takes over again.
No, thanks a lot, Vinny. Craig, you're in PSOD, and ADB, recognizing the role of private sector in development, aspires to expand its non-sovereign operations. And one of the challenges is aligning that with its sovereign operations. PSOD has been leading a number of initiatives to try to address this challenge. I've heard about your database system, streamlined processes. Could you talk a little bit about some of these approaches of facilitation and what are the challenges in implementing them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the one I think at this point I'd focus on first and foremost is actually the frameworks that we've been putting in place between the RDs and other departments and PSOD. And these are important because they build the start to the collaboration that the frontline videos and Vinny are talking about that needs to happen on the ground. And we all need to live that One ADB culture. But where you need to start is make sure you've actually got management working together and putting in place some frameworks, some ways of communicating, some ways of holding management forums to then set the pace and the direction. So we've got frameworks with CWRD, EARD, SARD, CERD, plus OPPP and SDCC, all trying to move forward on this One ADB concept. In addition to that, there are many specific initiatives, such as the energy transition mechanism, where we're working together to think about innovative products and what we can do together. So it's really important, I think, to emphasize that One ADB comes from, I think, having agile, purpose-driven groups of people that can drive forward the agenda. You're going to see more, I think, as Vinny said, out of the resident mission review. There's going to be different expectations around interaction and country partnership strategies. You're going to see CD work plans incorporate private sector objectives where reasonable and where appropriate. You're going to see dotted reporting lines, again, as Vinny was saying. So it's really all about working together. I think the organisation review will bring greater insight, and we as PSOD are trying to do a much greater level of both regional department, sector and country outreach. So we're holding meetings with CDs with as many as possible to talk about, well, what can we do together? How can we actually use some of our expertise to deliver training to staff? How can we hold a PSOD specific country director day so that everybody can talk around the table and everybody can gain knowledge and advantage from that? So there's an awful lot going on. The very key challenge is actually resourcing and capacity, because PSOD relative to the rest of the bank is small, and demand way outstrips supply or our ability to engage. I'll stop there. You mentioned data and systems, Manny. I'll come back to that because there's already a question that's coming in on the text about that, and we can talk about that a little bit later.
Sure. And we'll come back to the resourcing issue as well in a little bit. But I encourage actually the audience to please start sending your questions into the chat so that we can harvest them and have our panel reply. Karen, you're on the board committee that has at its main focus how to improve ADB's development effectiveness. ADB has a number of initiatives to try to implement the One ADB approach. From what you've read from the report, what should ADB be prioritizing from your own country perspective, and how to promote that approach?
Thanks very much, Manny. I just wanted to start with a comment on the why of these organizational reforms a bit more generally, because that's really important to me as a board member. So, for me, it's not about change for change's sake, but it's really about ensuring that we're able to deliver on our mission at a time when the challenges are growing and they're becoming more complex. I was really struck by some of the references in the recent IPCC report on adaptation, the references that they made to integrated and multi-sector approaches. They said with high confidence that such approaches increase the feasibility and effectiveness of adaptation in multiple sectors. So given the increasingly limited space for adaptation, DMCs need us to be doing these things a whole lot more. And for me personally, I also find it really useful to remember that fundamentally we're an organization that's about enabling change. So, we all see our work and our mission as ultimately improving people's lives. But when we're doing that, most of the time it requires people and systems and organizations and societies to change. And sometimes that's in quite uncomfortable ways, particularly in the short term. So I kind of say that because linking it back to the organizational reforms, I've sometimes felt that ADB's expectations of others are not necessarily matched with its own openness to change, particularly at a similar sort of scale and pace. So I really find, and I think all of us, should think of ourselves as change agents and keep that fundamental role as change agents in mind when we're looking at changing ourselves. So in that context, I really wanted to appreciate the level of ambition that we're seeing in the organizational reforms that management has underway, some in implementation, some in design. It really is quite massive, especially compared to where the organization was when I joined in 2019. So while I really do welcome that, the recommendations in the One ADB evaluation around the importance of that well-sequenced roadmap and effective and well-resourced change management function really resonated with me. So coming to then that question about the prioritization within that roadmap, we clearly can't do everything at once, even though I think from my perspective anyway, I can see the need for every aspect of the reforms. For me, it's really about identifying what are those key enablers. So what are the things that are on the critical path, or things that are sort of force multipliers and have the highest value. And the highest value can sometimes also just be, things that are implementable in a relatively quick period of time, and because that can kind of help build confidence and momentum that things are actually changing, and people in the organization can see that, and then they can feel that as well. So I will limit myself to three. So for me, the top three priorities would be country directors, so strengthening their role and capabilities of country directors. The second is that collaboration of sovereign and non-sovereign at the strategic level, not at the transaction level, really at the strategic level. And then the third thing is the addressing the incentives that act as that main barrier to One ADB approaches, and particularly addressing the really deeply rooted lending culture at ADB. And I think that, I heard those sort of resonate with some of the things that our voices from the field said as well. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Craig was making about about some of the systems and collaboration that he's got underway. And I think this could be a useful topic maybe for the panel to discuss further. Just how do we actually get effective collaboration? Because I found the feedback in the report about the burden of collaboration quite interesting. So, there's a risk that people hear they need to collaborate more, but they just end up overwhelming each other. So, I think Craig's comment about being agile and purpose-driven groups and collaborating around that certainly makes a lot of sense to me. Thanks.
Well, thanks a lot, Karen. In fact, why don't we go to that point on, there's a great desire and aspiration to change, but there were two constraints that you all have mentioned. One is resourcing. Change requires some resources, and the other is simply the bandwidth, people's attention and no one. It takes time to collaborate, and I don't see a lot of people. Actually, I don't see any people at all these days. But I don't see a lot of people in the ADB standing around doing nothing. So, Karen, can I go back to you then? At some point, it may be that management will come to the board about resources. You think there's an openness to that? I'm sorry, this is a tough question right off the start, but it might be raised.
Sure. That's why it's good to have a board member on these things. And look, I will definitely say this is one topic that I cannot speak on behalf of all board colleagues, because there really is a range of views on this one. I will kind of declare that I sit probably at the more kind of flexible and open to increasing resources end of that spectrum. And my own view on this, and some other colleagues definitely share it, is with Strategy 2030, this really is quite a step change for the organization. And I personally feel like over the last few years, we've been adding more and more and more on, and the expectations have really increased, but the resourcing hasn't necessarily matched it. So I definitely think we could see a case for that. But on the flip side of that, this is, some feedback I provided on the organizational review as well, is that it can't just be add. There's a huge amount of scope to be more effective, to strip out a lot of the unnecessary business processes, just to retrain and reskill people. It's not just about saying, well, we don't have the right people, and then we're just going to add a whole lot more people. And just back on this point about effective collaboration, it's like, how do you make the most of the resources that you've got? And just saying to people that they need to comment on things, and now they have an opportunity to have a view and a comment on ever more things is really going to be unhelpful, and I think quite overwhelming for people. So for me, that kind of comes back to what is the purpose of it, as Craig said, and what is your role when you're kind of collaborating on something. It's not just to offer a view. You need to be really clear about what your role is, and respect the role of others as well, particularly if it's not your decision to make. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Karen. And Vinny and Craig, we have at least one ally in the board on the resource issue. But let me turn to you then on the other challenge to integration, and that's the bandwidth. And people are overwhelmed already in having to deliver. How do you see that playing out, either at the country level or at the sector level, Craig, at the private sector side, in your experiences? And as Karen said, what should give if people are already working full tilt? Vinny, I want to start with you as a former country director.
Well, maybe a couple of thoughts, and building on my previous points. Firstly, there is, I think, there's some room to kind of make more with existing, achieve more with existing resources, and that's just by making things, either by doing things a bit smarter than we have so far, and that also involves learning, and it involves piloting. Examples are between public and private sectors that we, as we have been doing now over the last couple of years, increasingly, starting on the CPS level, we build those teams that prepare CPSs jointly between public and private sectors, and then create that trust and understanding. Then they continue that work after the CPS is through by going out to the client jointly. And now also the understanding by our management, both PSOD and in our case, I can only speak about CERT, but I understand it's in other regional departments just the same, where the top management says, well, let's pilot a couple of high priority initiatives, for example, the energy transition mechanism as one, where we go in and see this through with joint teams, and bring in public and private sector players from outside, mobilize them through our One ADB approach. And as we are working through these kind of pilots and examples, and in ever closer fashion, we become better at it, and we see the fruits, and then the resources will then hopefully also we convince our board and everybody else that maybe we can scale this up. Another example is on the knowledge side, if I may briefly on this. So we have in Indonesia, for example, let me go back to Indonesia. I think it's a good example where we have at the beginning of the year a high-level dialogue, a policy dialogue on top level, not top level, on minister, finance minister, and VP level, that confirms the broader directions of the partnership and the strategic directions, and also updates those as obviously the priorities and needs and priorities of the country evolve vastly. Then we have on the knowledge side, we have a knowledge coordination group where we know that we can only produce that much knowledge. We know we have to be extremely focused, and the focus, therefore, we believe has to be the alignment around existing and future operations, right? Both reforms and investment operations. And everybody who wants to contribute in terms of knowledge has to go through that filter, and that brings the various players together. And the purpose is really to support the country program, the lending program, through the knowledge, through the leverage between knowledge and finance. And this tends to work quite well. It's we're learning by doing, but what we've seen 10 years ago, that we have a lot of players and little coordination, that does not happen if there's effective coordination.
Thanks a lot, Vinny. Craig, let me turn to you. Do you see, you have a lot of colleagues in the field working in the private sector. We've been happily telling them, you have to go to more meetings at the country level. And so what are the challenges to managing this desire to integrate better?
Capacity, targets, and I think Karen and Linda made good points about the lending culture. So people are very focused on lending targets, as opposed to what I perceive to be a bit of a missing middle in our operations, which is to really get the right diagnostics and then the right long-term plan around how do you transition a country's economy to make it attractive for all of the private sector, not just PSOD. PSOD, with the capacity it has, will only ever be a small drop in the ocean for our DMC. So we've really got to think more broader in terms of private sector development, so you can attract other players and all of the capital that's out there into the region. And this is a golden opportunity, I think for us, and we need to address that gap in how we currently operate. In terms of the challenges for staff, I think I estimate that One ADB every year will add 5% more work onto our staff in a good way in terms of more collaboration. But then how, I think your question, Manny, was what gives? Well, I don't know how to square that circle without either reducing targets on another front or addressing resourcing. And to Karen's point, that's not just about add more, it is about how we more flexibly use resources. But the harsh reality is, if we want to scale up private sector operations, more investment is required. And we shouldn't shirk that question at all. We should be challenged that we're usefully deploying any extra resource, but we shouldn't shirk the question as an organisation, because it is adding strain. Where it works really well, that tends to be when you have people co-located on the ground. There's a real strain in the centre, I think, in terms of on management and their support teams, because in PSOD we are trying to cover everything that comes our way. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Craig. Of course, another way that the accountants might suggest is that we become more efficient. And so they've been talking about maybe data systems that you pointed out earlier that are easier to access, IT. Could you talk a little bit about that and some of the innovations that PSOD is trying to do to just grease the wheels, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. So we've been running a change program for quite a number of years so far, and I think we're one of the only departments to actually have a change team. And I fully agree with Karen that change is tough, and you need that change capacity to be able to move things forward with change professionals in those teams. I think for us, we want to be more agile, and where we're starting from is way behind in terms of processes and technology, and the challenge is the scope of what we have to deal with. One of the questions that have come through from the audience is about data systems and sharing information, and actually for us that's a key outcome. How do you work better together? Well, you need information, you need knowledge, you need to be able to access that, share it very easily. So part of the vision of what we're trying to do is you eventually get to golden source data that then the rest of the bank can use to say, we can get a picture of what's going on, we can have a discussion around that. So that's the key outcome. But the bankers, there is so much change going on in the bank, where we're almost running risks that we've bitten off more than we can chew, and it's going to be a multi-year journey. But it's good to see what's happening, and I've always been surprised since I joined the degree to which the bank has changed, and that's good to see. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Linda, just a heads up, there are a couple of questions here on the chat about what IED's views are. I can imagine at least one of these you don't have a view about, but there are two things. One is on the findings on staff mobility between PSOD and RDs. And do we have a view on integrating PSOD into the RDs? But let me turn it over to you just to clarify that.
Sure. I'll start with the first one, and I might pass the second one on to Alex. On the first one, on IED's findings on staff mobility and barriers, generally there's quite a lot of internal mobility. It's quite high. It's higher for IS than NS. But I think the issue here is, well, just to give you some data, first of all, between the period of 2012 to 2020, if we look at outposted staff, out of nearly 700 staff, 50% of those were from the 5 RDs, 28% were from PSOD, and 8% was from PPFD, and the balance from the other departments. So that kind of gives you an idea of range. But I think the issue really is, and we raise it in the report, is having this bilingual ability. So even though there's quite a lot of mobility, do you have the capacity and the nuts and bolts knowledge to contribute? And I think that professional networks become very important in bridging that gap. On a view, a structural view, Alex, can I pass that on to you?
I'd be happy to field that one. I think it's a very interesting question, but I think the evidence that we found in the study is that there are many moves that can be made for integration that don't require a sort of formal merging of departments. And the onus is not just on the idea of PSOD being absorbed into the RDs, that we feel there are some really good examples out there. If you look at the Tbilisi office in Georgia, where they have people with sectoral focus from both the sovereign and non-sovereign side sitting together. They are aware of each other's work that is going on, and that's an example of integration at the RM level, which we saw as very effective. So it's not just a question about PSOD being absorbed into the RDs. Think of the RDs being absorbed into PSOD, vice versa. We need, as Linda just said, this idea about people with bilingual abilities and able to sort of work collaboratively for the benefit of the external clients. And that's the big focus of where we're driving.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Maybe I could go back to you, Karen. A couple of our panelists have talked about how, and Linda herself, about the lending culture of the institution. That objective to lend doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from, I guess, perhaps perceived incentives for managers to actually hold into account. From you sitting at the board perspective, what kinds of targets and objectives do you think might be desirable or feasible to complement that lending approach to make sure that the incentives are aligned better with our aspirations? I don't know, is that clear?
It is a couple of thoughts here, because this whole issue of the lending culture has been kind of really clear to me since I joined ADB, and some of the issues that it drives and the incentives that it creates. And I guess if we talk about changing the lending culture, I think we need to be really, management needs to be really, really serious that they are doing that, because it's quite easy to say. And I think the reality is that people are still responding to what they believe the reality actually is. And we saw that through the COVID period as well, where even when we said, and there was kind of very strong messaging from the president supportive of the board that it wasn't about volume, and staff well-being was really paramount, and we didn't want to burn people out and what have you. I think people were still responding to what they perceived to be the real incentives and the real expectations. So I think if we're going to say something is changing, it really needs to be backed up with the reality of change. And for me, I think ADB staff are really good at responding, more so than I see in other organizations I've worked in, really good at responding to those incentives and those targets. And I think the thing everyone knows is that's what drives promotions. That's what actually drives the recognition in the organization, is no matter what you say about the interesting project you're working on, it's about those high volume projects. So, a sort of question that I raised on the organizational review is are we really, really serious? And what are the implications of shifting away from the lending culture? But what my own view and what I hear coming through as well is just how do we get more of a focus on development impact? So how do we make sure that we're doing the right thing for our DMCs? And that's why I think resident missions are really important, because they're quite well kind of tuned in to what the country is looking for, and how to sort of, good country directors know how to sort of pull that, as Vinny was saying earlier, how do you pull that from the center, and how do you get, the support that you need around different operations, including on knowledge as well. So we have the corporate results framework that does provide, very high level goals and measures of what we're trying to achieve as an organization. And that's not about lending volume. That's not about, apart from a few areas like climate finance, which is a bit of a leading indicator for us about the impact that we're looking to have. But I really think that we need to look at, what are the countries themselves trying to achieve? What are their goals? What's in their national development plans, and how do we help them with that? Because, when we talk about being client-centric, feedback that I've heard from DMCs, not just, those that I represent, is that they sort of know that ADB staff are coming with an agenda that is they have to hit their volume targets, and that's kind of why they're pushing certain things. So there is a bit of a perception there on the client side as well that I think this can, the shift away from it can help overcome. Thanks.
I'm so glad you brought up the client, Karen, because I want to turn to Vinny and ask him, and maybe to Craig as well, but Vinny first from his country director perspective. What is the demand for integrated services from the ADB? When I was at the World Bank, we always used to get flack saying, you guys are really complicated. The Ministry of Education wants to deal with the education sector, period. And we can get this thing out. Could you just tell me a little bit about is there an appetite from our clients for an integrated solution?
Yeah, of course there is, because, and that may also be a slight difference, or in fact, one of the big advantages that ADB has compared to colleagues in Washington, that we are one organization. We have one roof. They see one ADB, right? So that's the beauty of it. But I would like to take that also to respond a little bit to Karen or to the larger discussion on landing targets. You know, as we are improving our coordination and the way and the quality of what we have to offer to our clients, the better and the closer the partnership, the higher the demand by our clients, by the DMCs, for ADB support. And that ADB support is essentially it's lending and it's knowledge, right? Plus. And so that almost automatically, and particularly in times of crisis, increases the pressure, but not the pressure by management to push lending targets, but rather by many of our client countries to get more ADB support. And in many ways, that is flattering, isn't it? So it's also positive development, right? It depends how you look at it.
Thanks, Vinny. Well said. Craig, of course, you can comment on other things that have been raised, but there was a question on the chat about how the importance of diagnostic of the state of the private sector development, and what should PSOD's role be in that, and what's being done. Over to you.
That's a great question. I was just trying to type actually in response to that. I think there's a lot we can actually learn. So there have been some good reforms of the CPS process and the ICPM process to make sure that private sector is more embedded. But it does come back to this point about, I suppose, the missing middle of what do you really need to do and how do we get there? There's still a little bit, in my view, a culture of CPS drives pipeline rather than it is a true diagnostic view. So I'm personally trying to follow one CPS from start to finish so that I can take a look and say, well, using a critical eye, what do I take from this, and where do I think it could potentially be improved? Now, the challenge that I think PSOD has is that the majority of us are bankers. To term myself a simple banker, we know how to structure and do deals. I'm not an economist. I'm not an analyst in terms of myself being able to look at a country and draw conclusions around what needs to change. And that capacity is not really in existence in PSOD at the moment. I think we're thinking about, how do you fill that gap? Do we need a developing markets team or a division to be able to do that? So I think it's a really great question. And I think we've got to really think about how we can get the right diagnostics in place. But we'll still come, that's one building block in, I think, the greater challenge for all of us to think more strategically. Because I think that was a very important point Karen made. Operations will follow the strategic thought of the bank, and we've got to get better at going, well, how do we move in that direction? Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Karen, you wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Look, I really agree with everything that Craig's been saying on just then and his earlier points around this missing middle and the importance of it. On the diagnostics, yeah, I fully agree. This isn't PSOD's responsibility. PSOD has got certain perspectives and experience that, you know, and then sort of market intelligence that can really help and contribute to these diagnostics. But I don't see this being a kind of a PSOD diagnostic. And something that has been highlighted in the last couple of years is just the sort of shift away from private sector development as a focus. And, you know, it seems to me like we've lost kind of specialists who focus on this and that being their core role within the organization. So, you know, if we, one of the things the evaluation highlighted was PSOD and its link with the knowledge teams and sort of getting that kind of support from the knowledge teams could be strengthened. I think this is one area where you really should be able to rely on experts sitting in PSOD, accompanied by SDCC, EORCD, regional departments. It's very much a collaborative exercise. But I'd also just say, like, because we talked about this question of diagnostics when we were considering the PSOD operational plan. So I'm a long-standing fan of more diagnostics in this area particularly. And, you know, I remember talking to the former DG about it, and he was just saying, like, the intensity of doing these exercises properly, it's huge, it's really huge. But I just don't even think that ADB needs to be the one doing it itself. This is where, you know, we should see IFIs collaborating with each other. IFC actually does put a lot of resource into these diagnostics. You know, how can you partner with others to come up with something that is a genuine diagnostic of that economy, rather than what we sometimes see with diagnostics is it's almost like a justification for your pipeline. You know, as Craig was saying, it's kind of the CPS, but sometimes you see it in diagnostics as well. It's like, how have you managed to come up with these particular issues, which just happen to be the things that you're already doing or you want to invest in. But, you know, that collaboration could be helpful. Thanks.
Thanks. Vinny, you know, at the country interface, I imagine you've had to actually try to form these collaborative teams and getting, even though an activity is led by one department and with one manager, he or she has to get staff from knowledge and others. Have you seen good example of where that's worked? The question is, does the dotted line actually exist?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't exist as it should exist, but it's being introduced now. But because there has been this the attention by top management in regional departments and elsewhere on making the One ADB work much better as it did before, we find it works actually quite well. Craig and I both mentioned earlier the energy transition mechanism, where it's a working group on various levels, VP level, DG level, and staff level, that is working with our member governments, and particularly the three pilot countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, that we're working with, and private sector players as one team together, and it works wonderfully without any formal dotted lines. So as we get some runs on the board, as it were, with those teams, I think the dotted lines will evolve and I suppose the organizational review will inform and enforce that also, or take it to the next level, right?
Thanks, Vinny, and I'll take that as your parting words for us as we wind down. But let me turn it over to first Karen, then Craig for a 1 minute parting word for our audience. Karen.
So I guess my key message would be, just to try and always remember the why of this, because, I can see from some of the comments in the chat box, it's hard. ADB is hard, like the processes are hard. It's very burdensome. It feels, sludge was the word that was used there. There's a lot of opportunity to change this, and just remember why it's so important that we do. Like, just keep that in mind when you're trying to deal with the sludge and to get through this change process, because it is going to be something that, it's, as we said, it's going to take a number of years, but it is a really critical thing to do. And also just that change doesn't have to come down. I think that's one thing I'm kind of really reflecting on and talking to people about at the moment, is just like, how do you get, particularly in that kind of middle management level in the organization, how do you actually get change driven without waiting for your VP or your DG or DDG, to actually send it down to you in a memo and pass it on to the next person in a memo. Like there's a huge amount of leadership capability in every person in the organization, and we need to harness that. So everyone here, like I said earlier, everyone is a change agent. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Karen. Craig, last thoughts.
I can but agree with what Karen was saying, and it's about agile collaboration. It's about doing it for ourselves, and when we succeed, we really do succeed. Maybe a reflection on the organisation is that I think we touched on organisational design. So all the elements of organisational design need to follow strategy, and that's something we need to work on more as management. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So the overriding message is that it's up to all of us, all 250 of you on this call, to get that change going. So Karen, Craig, Winnie, thanks a lot for a terrific conversation. And also thank you, Linda and Alex and the whole team for stimulating this. So back to you, Saleha.
Thank you very much, Pani. Thank you, panelists, and have a good day.